So, assalamu alaikum to everyone who is viewing this webinar. Thank you so much for being here, listening to our observations and thoughts. My name is Isra Ibrahim. I am an analyst, media researcher with Milestones, and I'm joined with this panel here today with Brother Tanzim Doha, General Editor of Milestones, Brother Hanbal Shakur, who also works with us at Milestones, and also a very special guest, Brother Ali Harfoush, who is a Muslim researcher on Islamic and Muslim politics. So Jazakallah khair for the three of you for being here today to have this conversation.
Yeah.
So to begin, we're here because recently within Muslim American society, within activists, imams, and even US Muslim scholars, there has been a great discussion and debate regarding Imam Omar Suleiman's attendance and participation at a 2018 border protest. And the reason why this became very widely popular was because this was revealed by Daniel Haqiqatjou, who is known as a Muslim skeptic online and has like a very large online base. So to begin, I want to start us off by asking Brother Tanzim Doha to basically reiterate the recent events that occurred and why it is important for us to be having this discussion here today.
I seek refuge in Allah from misleading and from being misled, from betraying and from being betrayed into ignorance by others. I ask Allah to guide my heart and guide my tongue. I begin in the name of Allah, the most beneficent and the most merciful. Assalamu alaikum. This is a very important panel for me. Well, I will quickly highlight some of the things that drew me to this debate that's happening on the internet between Daniel Haqiqatjou and some of his followers and Omar Suleiman and many of his followers. So initially, I saw that there was a post made by Daniel, which had some photographs and some questions about Omar Suleiman participating in the border protest for immigrants and so on. And it raised some questions. So I did not think anything of it until I saw one of the supporters of Omar Suleiman or defenders of Omar Suleiman write a fairly long post, and it kind of accused Daniel immediately of being a liar and all kinds of things, that he is slandering Omar Suleiman using unethical means to do so, and then gave some from his perspective what he considered facts. So when I saw that brother post that, I was actually taking my time. I was a little confused whether actually this Daniel was not telling the truth or something. So I actually asked some people who knew Daniel and had invited Daniel to actually inquire and ask him, hey, what's going on? Is this actually, are you making stuff up? So they were also waiting, and I was waiting. And then, I saw a video. So now everyone saw the video. It was about the pagan ritual. And so in that video, everything was, for me, as just an objective viewer, I looked at it for facts. And for me, he provided all the evidence needed to show the rituals that were happening at this protest, in which major imams were present. Omar Suleiman being considered sort of the leading figure. And so that protest, of course, is about the immigration issue. It was at the borders. The protest itself, by itself, the cause itself is fine. But the rituals that were that people participated in were obviously, from an Islamic standpoint, a basic rudimentary understanding of Islam tells us the first thing that we learn in Islam is about shirk, basically, is false worship. And those rituals were there, they were happening. In one of the rituals, in the water ritual, we did see Omar Suleiman participate in it. So once I saw that, then I witnessed many posts. In my newsfeed, there was a lot of posts by established scholars who were writing basically public recommendation letters about Omar Suleiman and about his good character, et cetera, et cetera. And so there was a huge, almost like a clique, a network, an establishment within Islamic studies trying to defend Omar Suleiman. And then in their defense, instead of actually highlighting the evidence that's in the videos, they're talking again about intent of Daniel Haqiqatjou, which I still find very, very problematic. So one could have a lot of problems with Daniel's intensity, sometimes his content, whatever they might have. But in this instance, after this video came out, instead of actually worrying about the most important imam in the United States, engaging in these particular acts, engaging in a particular protest, which seems very coordinated, orchestrated, had a particular architecture to it, which seems predetermined, that it cannot be a simple thing that I was in a protest and other people were in a protest, I can't control other people. This is one of the defense, and it's a horrible, embarrassingly bad defense of the actions that were happening. So I'm very, very concerned as a Muslim student, as a Muslim academic, to see that the defense has been embarrassingly bad. It's simply just a personal support. It's sort of like, when Jimmy Kimmel or someone like that, a white comedian, was found in blackface, Chris Rock came out and supported Jimmy Kimmel, saying he doesn't have a bone of racism in him. I know Jimmy, da-da-da. It's sort of like, right, so you're basically a comedian, and in the comedy world, the black comedians have a huge role, and Chris Rock is the #1 comedian. So when he Jimmy Kimmel, then you're saved, right? So now we're saying this is an Islamic ritual, that Islamic question about participating in a ritual that is considered completely forbidden. So you see all these major figures in Islamic studies defending him, like, hey, he doesn't have a bone of racism, bone of paganism, or it's impossible that he would participate in such a thing, even when the evidence is in front of us. Very problematic for me. And then saying that Daniel is being malicious because he was a former, a worker or director in Yaqeen, etc. And they're using secondary data to kind of actually still character assassinate Daniel, which I find very problematic, because regardless of what his politics are, if this is the standard of debate, we're in deep, deep trouble. So this is the sequence of events I just wanted to highlight. And I think we do have to talk about it and clarify some things for sure. And there are other topics that I would get into as we begin this conversation, inshallah.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for that. You brought up a couple important points. One, specifically how the base of Imam Omar Suleiman and other US imams and scholars as well, the quickness of their base to moralize the issue, to make it a question of intent and morality, is also a way to escape critique. And also another thing about how the quickness of, like, there seems to be a class or a clique of these US Muslim voices that kind of coalesce together to defend one another. So when one is attacked, the others kind of feel obliged to protect that person because they feel that they are also being attacked as well. So very important points. I want to go to Brother Hanban. What are some of your important observations in terms of Daniel's findings, but also the response of others as well to this whole debacle?
Yeah, yeah, for me, I was actually a bit reluctant to even comment on all of this, just because I felt like the way the conversation was going was so problematic and unhealthy. And so, and which is the actual very reason why I felt it's important to comment, is because of the direction it's going. I felt before this point, in this particular conversation, there wasn't very much for me to contribute. But I think that at this point, I think it is beneficial because, first of all, let me say that I haven't agreed with or liked everything that I've heard come from Daniel Haqiqatjou. First of all, let me just say that I'm not a follower. I don't subscribe to him. I've listened to some of his stuff. I've listened to quite a few of his things. Not anywhere near how much stuff that he publishes. But I've listened to a few things that I felt like were relating and pertaining to things that were important to me. So I'm familiar with him, but I'm not a follower of his. I'm not a fan of his. And so I think that's important for people to understand going into this. And what bothered me is even seeing someone that I'm not a particular fan of being attacked for the wrong reasons. Because watching the video, and there's a lot of things that that come to mind with regard to this, and there's a lot of points that I want to address. But watching that video that he made, which essentially they forced him to make because of their intellectual laziness and cowardice,
Right.
and immediately calling him a liar and not actually investigating what is he talking about and not responding directly to what the acts are. So, you know, in a sense, they forced him to make this video, which is what I watched. And when I watched the video, the first thing that came to my mind is myself and other sisters and brothers, some who actually are involved with milestones, some of us who, as we came into Islam and we embraced Islam, we found ourselves in conflicts with people who we used to organize with in the community. We found ourselves in conflicts in coalitions that we were harmonious with before. And the nature of those conflicts was specifically about things like libation and invoking the names of dead people in particular ways, as part of rituals, etc. We actually had conflicts with people that we were involved in organizations together with, because when those things came up, we took a position that, as us being Muslims participating in things where the official program has shirk in it, we're not going to participate in any program where the official program has shirk in it. Now, it's one thing if we go to a program and some people decide to go off in the corner and pour libation and do whatever they're doing. It's one thing to say, well, I'm here, but I'm not participating. It's another thing to actively invest our time and energy into organizing an event and planning and scheduling and traveling to and being present for an event which official program has rituals of shirk in it. And so, you know, that's actually the nature of the conflict that many of us had in these different coalitions that we were working in, specifically here in Oakland. So that's the first thing that jumps out at me when I watch the video, is that we've actually had battles with people, and some of us were ridiculed and ostracized because we refused to participate in libations and in these particular rituals of invoking people and calling on other powers, etc. Because for me, when I came into Islam, what I was taught, and I hope you know that everyone is receiving the same message, the first act of the Muslim is to say no. The first act of faith is to say no. Is to say no to any other deity, to say no to any act of shirk. Before you can say that you've submitted, you're gonna say, you know, even in our testament of faith, we start out with the word no. La, no. That means that your first act and the primary act you're gonna be doing is rejecting falsehood. Your primary act is gonna be rejecting acts of worship and false deities. So if you've missed that, I don't know how you've missed that. But for us, in the little tiny bit that we knew about the deen as reverts, that was obvious to us. And so we struggled on that particular issue. And so, you know, watching that video is a little bit disheartening, and it feels like, well, if we're on our grassroots community level having these struggles, then what does it mean for prominent imams to promote and participate and the very types of acts that we were having conflicts and going through these difficulties because of. And then how is that going to affect young Muslim community organizers who are coming up and trying to get their bearings, and how do they change this corrupt society? What example does that set for the model of change that we want young Muslims to promote and to actualize, you know?
Yeah. Thank you so much for that. Your last point was so critically important about young Muslim organizers, because particularly with this example, Omar Suleiman is kind of branded as this imam of activism within like a lot of Muslim American spaces. He's really branded himself that way. And so when you have like a leading imam branded as this, this imam of social activism, of social justice, you're going to have like a lot of people within the community, particularly young people, who would be looking towards him as, as a model, as something that it's okay to kind of normalize. And it also kind of speaks to even the limits and even inabilities of American Muslims to uphold even the most fundamental Islamic principles, which is the Shahada for sure. I want to bring Brother Ali into this conversation and want to ask, how do you think the defensive response by many who are defending Omar Suleiman will have a political impact for Muslims living in the West in particular?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala ashraf al-anbiya al-mursaleen. So, I mean, similar to Brother Hannibal, I was prior to this week very hesitant to give any input or opinion on the issue, precisely because it's become very heated and divisive. In addition to the fact that I'm not a person of authority, I'm not a da'i like Brother Daniel, or an imam or sheikh like Brother Omar Suleiman, Sheikh Omar Suleiman. But I've noticed, a very troubling trend, which I think will have negative implications for the Muslim community in the United States, which is that the issue has created a sort of polarization amongst Muslims. And inadvertently, we now have these two camps. And the problem about speaking about this issue, about the mas'ala, about the specific act, right, or commenting on the issue, is that it is very difficult for people not to place you within one of these two camps, right? It's very difficult for people to think outside of these two categories. And in Islam, right, our ethos teaches us that we do not coalesce around men, right? No matter how noble those men are, no matter how much they have contributed to the ummah or the level of knowledge and whatnot. As Muslims, we are committed to the truth as a whole, right? And we are committed to the truth wherever we may find it. So if we find elements of the truth with one scholar, we recognize it and we take it from him. And if we find the truth in someone else, in elements of the truth, such as adab and akhlaq in someone else, we also recognize it. And one of the problems of this polarization of these two camps is it also obstructs us from looking at the contributions that have been made by both of these brothers, right? And it's kind of we've kind of fallen into this cancel culture, whatnot. So for example, okay, and as someone who the brothers know, that I'm critical of this interfaith whole interfaith paradigm, for lack of a better word, and whatnot. Despite that, right, it would be unjust not for me, for example, to recognize the mahasin, right, the contributions of figures like Sheikh Omar Suleiman, such as the revival of an important sunnah, right? So he's being attacked for the Sunnah framework that he developed through the Yaqeen. But at the same time, you know, as a Muslim growing up in the United States, I have to appreciate the fact that he revived an important Sunnah, which is the Sunnah of activism. Now, I might disagree with the framework, right? But it is not easy in the United States, especially within the mainstream Muslim community, to adopt such a position or to revise such a Sunnah, right? Like we all remember what our Imams were doing during the 2003 war in Iraq and how disoriented the Muslim youth were. And, you know, we didn't have any voices of guidance at that time. So for me to come back to the US, you know, 10 years later and find brothers and Imams like Sheikh Omar Suleiman, you know, active on the political scene, this is something that, you know, we should recognize as one of his mahasin, one of his something that he has contributed to the ummah. Similarly, Brother Daniel, right, in terms of his defense of the Sharia and his uncompromising stances on the issue of the Sharia. So now, how do we move beyond this polarization? In Islam, we have this idea of a tawassut, right? Balance, taking a balanced approach. And a balanced approach does not mean pragmatism. It does not mean compromise, right, between two extremes. The tawassut means that one shows commitment, that one is principled, right, and that one shows discretion. And it's the second part that I want to highlight. What do we mean by discretion? So being principled, that's obvious, right? That we don't compromise on our deen or anything of that sort. But what is meant by discretion? Discretion is prudence, right? It's hikmah in terms of how we approach any particular mas'ala or how we correct the errors of a particular individual or how we speak and how we engage with the public. And why is discretion in this particular case important? In the case of the interfaith incident and Sheikh Omar Suleiman. Discretion is important because when we speak, we are not speaking in an academic setting to Muslim theologians, to students of knowledge, or in a policy circle. We are speaking to the Muslim community and to the Muslim youth. And the Muslim youth are naturally, you know, vulnerable to influence, and they have ghira. They have ghira for their deen, and they have ghira for their mashayikh, for their du'at and whatnot, right? So this issue is not, I mean, people are making this issue about, like, you know, the people who are defending Brother Daniel and those who are defending Imam Omar Suleiman, people are making this about Sheikh Omar and about Brother Daniel. But I don't think that these are the only two people we need to be taken into consideration. We need to think about the youth, the Muslim youth, right? So when we come out and we speak and we engage with quote unquote the other camp, you're not just speaking, for example, to Sheikh Omar Suleiman or Yaqeen Institute, for example, in the case of Brother Daniel and Brother Daniel's, I mean, I don't like this word, but supporters, but you're not just speaking to Omar Suleiman, Sheikh Omar Suleiman, or the Yaqeen Institute, but you're also speaking to a huge portion of the Muslim youth, right? A huge portion of the Muslim youth, right? And so instead of polarizing the Muslim youth, and of course this also applies to the brothers at Yaqeen and some of the shuyukh affiliated with Yaqeen who have been throwing comments at Brother Daniel, insinuating that he's a rat, for example. So whether it's the sarcasm that unfortunately, and this is why I'm not really a big fan of Brother Daniel, whether it's the sarcasm and the memes and that stuff that Daniel frequently uses to engage with the brothers at Yaqeen Institute, and what he calls the Yaqeen bots and the Yaqeen interns, which is also insulting, or the brothers who try to paint Brother Daniel as some kind of ISIS takfiri khariji, right? Both of them are doing an injustice, not only to themselves, but to the Muslim youth, the Muslim community as a whole. And as Muslims, our commitment is to who? Our fidelity is to who? Our fidelity is to the truth and it is to the community, right? It is not for an institute. It is not for whether that institute is or individuals such as whether Daniel or Yaqeen Institute or Sheikh Omar Suleiman. Our commitment is to the Muslim community, right? So this is what I think we need to be taking into consideration when we tackle these masail, you know, these events like the event of the interfaith protest and the libation and so forth.
Mm. Yeah, thank you so much, Brother Ali, for those comments. It's very important. Brother Hamid, if you could make also a point about how cliques, you know, creating these like different cliques within like Muslim American
absolutely.
activism, just how it's harmful and whatnot as well.
Yeah, and you know, that's something that definitely, as the brother was speaking, is that's kind of like one of the main things which I wanted to address, and why I felt it was vital for us to talk about it, because number one, one could say that we come from a social justice background. Personally, that's not how I identify it. It's just straight up justice. You know? So it's Allah's justice. It's what we're focused on. But you know, one could say that we come from that background because we organize in the community. We've been involved with activism. I've been involved with activism all my life, like since I was a child. So, you know, one could arguably say, you know, things about social justice, etc. Right? And you find, for example, you find Daniel saying things about activism and utilizing sort of finding examples of really like vulgar politics that you find in activism, and then using that as like a broad stroke to paint over whole issues, you know, questions of race and a lot of different issues. You find that that happens, right? And then on the other hand, you find that you know, people on the other side of that equation say that, you know, they're fighting oppression, et cetera, but it's like, you know, they react to the Sharia as if it's a burden to them. You know, when you talk about the law, they treat it like a burden to their good work, and they treat it as if it's something that is just wide open to interpretation. And so that's something I feel like on both sides of the equation, you have these issues, right? Where you have people who on the one hand believe that they're, you know, really sticking to the deen hard and you know, rejecting the corruption of society. And then on the other hand, you have people who feel like they're providing the more compassionate model of Islam, you know, and I find both of them problematic. But the biggest thing, the most problematic part of it is that because they're presenting themselves in this particular kind of way, and I think that some of it is very intentional, people presenting themselves in a particular way, they're creating these cliques, right? And it's like the brother was saying earlier, like Brother Ali was saying earlier, how it's difficult to keep yourself out of these categories. It's difficult to say, I have my own opinion and not get automatically lumped into one category or another. And so what ends up happening is these people have a conflict based on their whole approach. And so whenever an important issue comes up, instead of focusing on the issue and dealing with the issue, they utilize the issue as a device in order to fight against the thing that they're really fighting against, which is each other. You know, they're fighting against each other, and then you find them utilizing these devices to say, like, see, this is what's wrong with social justice. See, this is what's wrong with, these whole people, this whole conservative, and they come up with names like Ak Right, and this kind of things, right? And people come up with these names, Ak Right, social justice warrior, and then they come up with all of these things until a point where when the issue comes up, you can't even talk about the issue. The only thing you're talking about is where your loyalty is. So, okay, so if you're criticizing Omar Suleiman, you must be like Ak Right, and if you're defending him, then you must be like, social justice warrior, queer nationalist, and there's like, they kind of go at each other in this way, call each other names and things. And, Allahu Alam, but with all human certainty, there are people who are actively taking advantage of the situation and steering the conversation away from any type of reason and keeping it like in this personality conflict, this clique conflict where you can't deal with principles. You just have to be loyal to one camp or the other. And, and I mean, it's problematic on so many levels, but for me, the thing I find most difficult about it is someone like myself, who I find myself kind of in a cross because, like for me, Islam is perfect. Within our tradition, everything it has everything that we need for any kind of struggle that we're going to be involved with, for any kind of project we're going to be involved with, for any kind of effort that we're going to be involved with. Is neatly, beautifully designed within our deen, right? On the other hand, we can't simply turn away from what the oppressed people of the society are going through. We have to be present, and we have to meet people where they're at, and we do have to provide a compassionate model of change, of dawah, of community development. That's absolutely vital. So it can be very frustrating and tiring for these things to be like pit against each other like a dichotomy. It's not an either or. And when we can get away from the either or, then we can be more effective and efficient at dealing with the actual what. What is the issue? You know what I mean? And are these things halal or not? Is this the model that we want to promote for the young people? Is this what we feel is going to be effective for us to organize ourselves, etc.? We have to be able to question everything. And at the level of leadership, leadership is so divided and disorganized that there's not very much a standard to even judge by, to say like, this is our standard of principles and ethical leadership. We don't have that. It's just you pick your flavor. You decide the imam you like, and you just defend your team, and that's very problematic. So I would like to see us get away from that.
I just add one thing to what the brother was saying, and then in order to use it maybe to raise the point that he discussed about the importance of taking up these issues and discussing other the issues at hand with the Muslims, and especially the state of oppression, whether it is the Muslims or the non-Muslims. And when we talk about oppression, that's what's really at stake. We're having this debate, right? What's at stake around the world, right? In this new liberal age of militarism and the increasingly militarized police state in the United States and so forth, events in Portland, the events in Egypt as we speak, that's what's at stake. But before, I think Brother Tanzeen is more qualified to talk about that than I am. Something important to say about the dangers of the polarization that is now prevalent, unfortunately, is that when you have a polarized atmosphere, right, the scope or your ability to give nasiha becomes negated, right? There's no longer a mutual space for nasiha. And the Prophet, nasiha, to give advice, to correct, right? And the Prophet says, ad-din nasiha, that the religion is nasiha. And, Brother Ustad Ofamir Anjam, he has this part of the passage in his text on his text on the Taymiyyah intervention, on the political jurisprudence of Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahmatullah alayhi. There's this wonderful passage that brings about the issue of the Muslim community and its relationship to, and this highlights the importance of nasiha and the dangers of polarization. He says that, how are we to understand the prophetic hadith which says that the ummah will not coalesce or agree upon falsehood? Does this imply the infallibility of the ummah? No. Rather, Ibn Taymiyyah says that it is precisely within the ummah, within the community, through use the words of Ustad Anjam, the dynamic process of correction, that the ummah gains its protectedness from error, right? And this is why the Muslim ummah, is able to be a witness to the truth, to mankind. So what happens when we close off ourselves into two camps and we negate the space for nasiha? Now, there has never been a time more important in our history, at least the history of the Muslim community in America, to be giving nasiha to one another and to be engaged in shura than now, right? We're about to enter the month of October. You have the November elections coming up, right? There's never been a time for the scholars and du'at and the academics and the shuyukh to sit together and to begin thinking about issues beyond, and this is where I want Brother Tanzeen can talk about this, that this issue of interfaith and the pagan ritual and the sacred activism of Imam Dawood Walid and so forth, right? How can we go from debating those specific masail to discussing what I think is a more important issue at hand, which is the American Muslim discourse and the problems with the American Muslim discourse, the narrative that is being put forth by American Muslim leaders, and that is should be our point of contention. And in fact, I think that a lot of the deviations or the errors that we see in the discourse of American Muslim leaders and in the debates are actually a product of a bigger problem, right? So these interfaith gatherings, right? Our inability to see that these interfaith gatherings are part of can only occur under the framework or under a particular horizon, which is a secular horizon that sets the terms for these events. Our inability to see that is because there's a bigger problem at hand, which is where our nasiha now needs to be directed and which needs to be debated.
Oh, thank you so much, Adi, for that. I would just say, for my observations, it's important to note that the polarization we're seeing now, currently it's being ruptured just in front of our faces, but it's been one that's been very deep-seated for a very long time. A lot of within U.S. Muslim discourse, whether it's within activism, scholars, and imams, there has been a deep-seated polarization occurring at institutional levels and masajid and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to bring Tanzeen to kind of add to this conversation about some of the limits of American Muslim discourse, and also kind of the question of what is legitimate critique and what is nasiha and all of that. Yeah, so go ahead.
Those are really great points. I want to quickly actually, I know we're kind of discussing a lot of these things at the meta level, like a higher level. I want to quickly really be real about this, man. Like when it comes to this particular instance, it has been an unfair, un-Islamic attack on the character of Daniel. This is my Islamic obligation. I have nothing to, I've never met the guy. I've never known the guy, etc. To call someone a liar when he brings in more and more evidence is not Islamically okay. It doesn't matter how sweet Omar Suleiman's words come out. It doesn't matter that Omar Suleiman sounds like Obama Muslim. It doesn't matter. Those are not relevant here. What's really important is that the truth has been out. It's literally saying that, imagine shirk is worse than zina. And if it's a public act, when I cover my brother's weakness or a sister's weakness, it's when it's a private act or when two people know about something. We're supposed to build each other up. We give dawah in the community. We had made mistakes, etc. That's very different than this. This is the imam of the Western Hemisphere. He wants to say he's the student of Malcolm X. That's what he wants to say. Yeah. So listen, you can't slit yourself. Like you can't say, I was in a public environment and I slit myself into zina. You can't do that. Nobody does that. You can't just mistakenly slit yourself into shirk. You see? So it's like a horrible crime, and we have to identify that as such. It's not overplaying it. It's not overdoing it when we state that. It's actually harmful for young Muslims to blindly follow the discourse of institutes and figures and then claim Malcolm's legacy when we're over and over for a year now talking about why that's not the case. Malcolm X had an amazing character and personality, and he took a very strong stance. There were many people that were sent to him to commit crimes, and he didn't. This is why Malcolm was so different than Martin. We know that. Now, here's the other question. Polarization is different than antagonism. In this particular instance, it's not an equal polarization in my view. I agree with the brothers. I agree with all of you. It's not an equal polarization. In this particular instance, the way Daniel is being attacked by everybody is wrong. And the way Omar Suleiman is being defended in an unconditional way is wrong. So we have to be clear about that. Now, here's what's happening that I don't like. I don't like that this conversation on polarization is making us forget the real antagonism of history, which is between Islam at the globalized level of the Islamic South and American empire and secular hegemony and the war on terror. This is what I don't like. We're not talking about that. This discourse is happening inside America. Who wants to be the better guy, better spokesperson in America? That's what this is about. The attack is on Orthodox Muslim men and women. That's what the war on terror targets. And that is being forgotten. So that's an antagonism that we have to go to. Brother Daniel does a good job of giving a moral criticism of secularism, but we have to go beyond that and critique the libido and political economic foundation of the war on terror and the secular powers. The reason why I like some parts of Brother Daniel, because it actually begins a conversation about the Sharia being really significant and supreme. That's our belief. We're not equal to others when it comes to that. We believe we're Muslims because we believe we have the better system than anybody else in the world for the benefit of mankind. That's what we have to believe if we're to be Muslim. So that's number one. That's something that Daniel does a great job of talking to a base of people who are being ignored by the so-called social justice warrior, the label, is because they're too eager to talk to interfaith conversations while their own deen is unsettled. They're too eager to have interfaith conversations, too eager to be to walk like Al Sharpton but talk like Malcolm. They're too eager to be like that. We have to condemn that politically, directly, openly, without any problems. I have no problem saying that. Now, was that too intense for American Muslim? Oh well. So here, the other problem is, the question of sacred activism, this term that Imam Dawood Walid started, but then in Yaqeen, there's a long document that Omar Suleiman wrote about, which is about faith activism. I encourage all the viewers who have any iota of militancy in them to read this document and see if it is completely consistent with what the RAND project promotes as civil society Islam. That's not to me, that's not the Sunnah. That's not the Sunnah base. Just because you put up stuff about how you're going to adjust and criticize for rights and add a few hadith passages here and there, I'm not impressed. Intellectually, very mediocre. Not impressed, my brother. Not impressed, Yaqeen Institute. Not impressed. So that document tells us where the direction is for American Muslims. Listen, I got messages from the Islamic South as soon as this debate started. I was not going to touch this. I was going to talk about economy for the next few weeks. Okay, I was going to talk about economics and the problems of economics. Then the brothers sent me, the streets wouldn't have it. They were like, you got to talk about this. This is incorrect what they're doing. You got to talk about it. That's why we're talking. That's why I called up the brothers and you, hey, let's have a conversation actually. This is not right. So faith-based activism cannot be a kind of activism that basically integrates and assimilates Muslims into a project of a huge idolatry, which is knowing that the slave-owning American economy is good, and to trying to integrate into that economy and trying to be the junior settler and trying to give the license to that by using Islamic justification. That is incorrect, and that needs to be critiqued. Our brothers and sisters, much more important than Daniel Haqiqatjou and Omar Suleiman, are the injured, killed brothers and sisters all over the Islamic South, destroyed, economy destroyed, country destroyed, political geography disoriented. All of those things are happening. I'm a product of the war on terror. You cannot create a model of activism which is consistent with counterterrorism. That's what this is. The model of activism that Omar Suleiman promotes is a model of activism consistent with de-radicalization project of the state. Those are facts. We can't be, no, we're not gonna be, my teachers didn't tell me this. Imam Jamil Alameen, his students are my teachers. Amir Abdullah is my teacher. So they're not gonna be quietly accepting that. We're not accepting that. So that's number one. The other thing I wanted to quickly talk about was that there was a brother Raja who's a good friend of mine, who's a good friend of mine. This critique of Daniel Haqiqatjou and this kind of sarcasm undermines legitimate critique of Omar Suleiman. Brother Raja, that's not correct. We know, you and I know what's going on. We know what's going on. We know what happened in the Wolf article. I was contacted by people who follow Omar Suleiman. Do not put the article Nasiha. It's a public conversation about a public figure. I said, we're going to put this article out. It's a political critique. Talk to him. Then we're open to talking. He never spoke. So it's not true that when we're nice, Omar Suleiman's going to respond. He has no reason to. It's a multi-million-dollar project called Yaqeen Institute. We're not condemning the institute, but it's just that we're not that important. We don't want to be important. Why do we have to constantly ask for permission to write stuff about it? Or anybody for that matter. About Daniel, if I wanted to write tomorrow about something Daniel writes that's not really rigorous, I can write that. That's nothing to do with anything. And to integrate yourself into the discourse of the American project. This is very important, and that's where I'm going to put it for now. There's more conversations to be had, but that's where I'm going to end it for now.
If I could just
go ahead. Go ahead.
Piggyback on that. We're just after the truth. People won't be so vigorously trying to shut down certain conversations.
Yeah.
But part of the problem is that people have unethically tied their livelihood into, when you talk about a lot of these nonprofit organizations, and when you talk about a lot of these social justice activists who don't work. Their social justice activism is their work. Their whole livelihood is tied into having a prominent standing, having a positive, having a positive standing in the community, etc. And and promoting certain policies, right? We get funding based on qualifying for this certain grant. So here's the requirements. So now we take certain parts of the dean and we see how can we put that part of the dean in this grant requirement so that we can tell the community we're doing it for Allah, but we can also buy that house.
How multicultural
pay that
Islam
car
is.
note.
Yeah.
And so that's a big part of the problem, in my opinion. That people, because when you have a political criticism for them, it's not just a political criticism for them, it's an existential attack on their livelihood. And that is something that will actually take a person out of rational thinking.
Right.
If you're actually literally concerned that your funding requirements, you might not meet your funding requirements if the community isn't down with this particular program, or you will have to pay back money if you don't meet certain participatory markers, etc.
Right.
It can take a person out of rational thinking if your livelihood is tied up into these things in that way. So that if someone like Daniel, for example, has some knowledge and can give a legitimate critique, and it could potentially gain some traction, then for some people, that becomes an existential threat, because livelihood is tied up into how how the debate plays out and how they look after coming under scrutiny of what they're up to.
If I can just add, I mean, I just wanna, I'm usually, I mean, I don't disagree with anything that Brother Tanzeen said, but I'm just gonna play good cop for a minute. So I'm just joking. So without a doubt, alhamdulillah, as Muslim activists, we are committed to the truth, right? And when we speak of truth, we are not speaking of truth in its watered down the residues of the truth, nor are we talking about a compromised truth, nor are we talking about the project that Rand Corporation wants to put forth and so forth. We are talking about the truth and Islam and liberation as an event and liberation as a rupture from the prevailing order of things. There is no ambiguity about this.
Right.
This is our millah, this is the millah al-Hanafiyya, this is the millah of Ibrahim alayhi salam. That being said, we have to keep in mind something, which is this, that we are engaging, right? So I'm from the East Coast. You're in the West Coast where, mashallah, you guys got the Berkeley and Davis. And so at least on the East Coast, okay, we are dealing with a Muslim community that since the 1950s has to a large extent, at least our parents, right, and the generations that preceded us, and the institutions and the imams, the whole network of the Muslim, the whole fabric of the Muslim community was very much apolitical. Okay, there was no political training, there was no Islamic political culture. We did not have access to Sayyid Qutb rahimahullah. That's something I had to download on archive.org, right? You remember back in the day. We did not have access to Abu al-A'la al-Mawdudi, to Imam Hassan al-Banna, and so forth, right? So a lot of these brothers and sisters who are now getting into political activism, right, in the wake of populism and Donald Trump, and so forth, right? Keep in mind that the community at large coming from a void, right? And so this is why I said at the beginning that, and of course, this is not to do with the brothers and some of the brothers supporting general support, and not just in terms of the, when we are speaking to culture without an Islamic cultural background and out of for the oppressed, right? Then we must exercise patience. Now, patience does not mean compromise. It does not mean compromise. We need to be very clear, and we have to put the dots on the letters, right? That's Arabic saying, actually. نقاط على الحروف. That we are gentle, because again, no matter how much respect I have for brother and Sheikh Omar Suleiman or brother Daniel, this is not about them. This is about the Muslim community, and this is about the youth. And ultimately, our commitment is to Allah, His Messenger, and our community, especially the youth. So this is where I think that, so we need two types of interventions at this point, right? And I think one of the reasons I love to participate with Brother Tanzeen and Sister Isra and now Brother Hannibal is because Milestones is actually providing us with that platform. We need two types of interventions. One, the radical critique with the existing American Muslim narrative, right? One that facilitates, if only cognitively, a rupture with the prevailing order, the prevailing secular order, which is just as much cognitive as it is institutionalized. That's another topic. So you need that intervention, and at the same time, we need an intervention. I don't want to call it spiritual, but I want to call it a brotherly intervention, right? Where as activists who hold these ideas, we are extending our hands to the youth, right? We're not putting up our hands and creating barriers. So this is my nasiha. What I want to end it with that on my end, to the brothers who know that I advocate for the Sharia and who know that I support many of the positions that Daniel has stated, but that we must state these opinions and that we must extend our hands to our brothers and sisters with discretion and with patience, inshallah.
Inshallah, I agree with you.
Inshallah, yeah. And just to add to Brother Ali's point, I guess someone also from the East Coast, South Florida, definitely we have this history of a very apolitical history, to the point where the major organizations that we have here are really just, fundamentally like civil society Muslims and institutions that have no grassroots legitimacy or anything like that. And so, especially for youth, Muslim youth organizers, it's important that they at least see a political intervention or, a platform kind of speaking to them to kind of rupture their environment and their social context. So critically important there. I want to go to either Tanzeen or Brother Hanbal if you guys have more to add to this conversation on Brother Ali's point or anything that was brought up.
Yeah, I really appreciate that point. I mean, we have to and when we know, like, we don't want to be in the same organization together, even when we know that, we still got to be able to talk to each other, even if we don't want to have like all the time working with each other and have to have a unified position on everything, but we need to be able to communicate with each other. And especially if you would have two people who are normally friends, they should be able to talk to each other about, okay, I like this guy's position, I like this guy's position. They should be able to talk about it. So when you find that people are, insulted at the mere fact that you would try to engage them in intellectual discussion, right, that's scary to me, and I think that part of it, just like the brother was saying, we have to critique this American Muslim tradition that they're creating. Because if we look at America right now is having an identity crisis, where it's saying it has 1,000 personalities. You know, I just seen an article the other day about a transgender Satanist sheriff, and I was like, what's even going on? That is an identity crisis. Okay, now I used to hear that word a lot when I was a kid, identity crisis. I used to hear that word a lot, but nowadays you can't talk about that, because nowadays a person's identity crisis is considered their liberation. But the reality is America's having this massive identity crisis, and everyone is trying to invent some new identity, etc., right? And so it's like, you know, it's creating all these little conflicting identities, you know, all these little conflicting groups, and that are tearing at each other, and those Muslims who are very heavily influenced by American politics, and who find themselves captured in it, and, you know, very much involved within it. A lot of them are also falling victim to that same identity crisis.
I mean, just to add to that, I would just say I agree with Hannibal. I agree with Ali also. But here's my thing. I think we have to have a concept of time and history. So when we have that, then we see that if I have to talk to someone and they've already bought the idea of American Islam, we should actually then question this is not necessarily an internal conversation anymore, right? I cannot give nasiha to someone who bought the American project fully and his whole life is dedicated to integrating Islam into America. So really is a power question here. When you do that, you got more power socially, politically, militarily, funding wise. I don't, because my position is that America has to be disarticulated. So if that's the case, and people all over the world who are Muslims are destroyed by this power structure, and you're interested in integrating into the power structure, then the question is for American Muslims, do they want to actually be part of the Islamic world and address the antagonism that their project of that which they're a part of as junior settlers is participating in? Or are they actually going to be really open about conversations in Islam? I'm very open to sabr, nasiha, all of this within Islam, meaning the Islam that is about honor, that is about clear about what is fighting against it. The American empire wants to change even the definition of Islam. It wants to take out different citations in the Quran. If it wanted to, it would. It created the study Quran, which wanted to complexify very straightforward verses and so on. It did all sorts of things in which millions of dollars are being invested in. So that is not, so you see, in other words, American Islam is making itself the class enemy of Islam. This is not my invention. They've done that. They've participated in that. They've created fitna within Islam by bringing America into the equation, by bringing Europe into the equation. And you know another thing, I come from a climate of dictatorship. I grew up in Bangladesh. We saw many Muslim leaders our whole country was forever run by Muslims. It's a Muslim majority country. So how do we take a position against the government then? You see, we don't say, oh, we wouldn't go talk to Sheikh Hasina. He's disappearing my brothers who I pray with. That's what she's doing. That's what the regime is doing. Do I have to go talk to Sisi now because he has a Muslim name? No, I don't. Do I have to talk to the imams and the sheikh and everybody, the whole complex who supports the Saudi regime bombing Yemen? Do I have to go support the Iranian regime bombing Syria? No, I don't. I don't have that obligation. So that's why I'm saying that this question is about Islam. And more, they're looking at the American project as a friendly project in which only the Trump types are the problem, you see? Yaqeen has people who are advisors to Obama. So that means they think a particular kind of leadership in the White House is important for them. That's what civil society politics is about. it's very hard for me to have conversations. Now, I agree with Ali, the base people who are all over the world, the Muslim youth and everywhere, we have to get to them. Those are younger brothers and sisters I deeply love because they're Muslim. I have to embrace them, and they have to arrive at the truth, though. They have to arrive, they have to look at, you know, the real figures of history who questioned America, you know? And some of them are non-Muslim, you see? Beginning with people like Harriet Tubman, who was called the Black Moses. Well, that's what white people thought she was. Talk about the Messiah, they called Harriet Tubman the Black Moses, you know? So these are all figures, and a Bookman, all of these figures. This is important because they're questioning, dismantling America. That's what's important. These are the oppressed who destroyed oppression. That's what they wanted to do. And so we got to have a very different concept of interaction outside of what these papers and documents are showing, whether it's RAND project or the Yaqeen document. I think we have to develop a model that is really, and here's the other thing I forgot to mention, the Yaqeen document, when you read it, it's also clear that it's an anti-Islamist project, meaning Islamism, which started, if we started with Hassan al-Banna, the whole history with the Brotherhood, Said Qutb, and then later on when it became non-state actors participating, all of that, this document is precisely the counter thesis to that. Read it, please, please carefully read it. I encourage our listeners to read that document. It's in Yaqeen Institute. If you Google Yaqeen Institute, Faith Activism, Omar Suleiman, you will see it. And we should write a long-term paper on it, but it's highly problematic. It has no concept of history, no concept of real oppression, no concept of economy, time, nothing. It's intellectually extremely mediocre. It's basically like a pamphlet thing to convince, it's propaganda, to convince people to participate in civil society. So that's all I have for that part.
Yeah, no, I would add to that. I think even the importance of this webinar isn't to speak directly to the brand of Imam Omar Suleiman or the brand of sacred activism or even Daniel, but really the people who do follow them, who would then kind of require that rupture in their context, you know, speaking directly to not even just Muslim youth, but just Muslim Americans who may be thinking of these questions, but have not had the platform or the space to openly and publicly discuss what does it mean to disarticulate America? What does it mean to enact a project of Islam? Because they've just been so insulated in these, you know, pro-America, you know, American exceptionalist like spaces that is, you know, kind of become of like a lot of these imams and scholars. So I think the intervention doesn't happen at like the institutional level or the counterterrorism projects of like trying to depoliticize, de-Islamicize a lot of Muslim American projects that focus on like multiculturalism, that focus on getting out the Muslim vote, not speaking to them directly because they're already kind of institutionalized. They already are funded by the government. They have all these grants, but really speaking to the bases that follow these individual people, that follow these personalities, because there has been. I remember when we did write our piece last year about Omar Suleiman and Hamza Yusuf and kind of critiquing the model of like, you know, US civil society politics within Muslim Americans. I have had like, you know, young people, young Muslims reach out and talk to me about, hey, you know, we've kind of been having these questions discussed, having these discussions, but we don't seem to have the space or the opportunity to kind of create these events with our own Muslim American organizations, for example. But I mean, I think we should assume that there are people thinking and articulating these concepts for themselves, but they just need to be, I guess they just need to be given the platform or see, you know, something like this to be, to understand that you know, your thinking is correct. There is space for that. There is space to talk about what does it mean to really disarticulate America and institute a project of Islam. And it's not, you know, crazy or radical of you to think like that. So I think it's important just to make that point. Yeah, so we talked a lot about different points, and I kind of just want to give it to you guys for any like closing points that you would want to add or something for our viewers to kind of consider.
The brothers should do.
I'm good.
I mean, one thing, you know, Muslims,
Mashallah.
don't defile yourselves. Don't defile yourselves. You know, there's no shortcuts in this deen. There's no you know, there's no easy way. This life for us is a test, and you know, at least we're gonna sweat to try to get the answer right.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because if you just try to make everything easy and smooth, you're gonna like slip right into failure. You know, and you're gonna be sitting here talking about, oh, I just ended up at a shirk ritual. I didn't plan to be there. I didn't know, you know. I don't even know what they're saying, but my point is, you know, to the younger folks, you know, it's gonna be a struggle for us. It's gonna be a struggle for us. You're not gonna have a regular American 9-to-5 life and the struggle, you know. So you need to be thinking about what it's going to require of us and how can we create our own pathways to do what we have to do so that we're not following behind people that are obviously failing in their society. You know, American society is failing. We do not need to follow behind them into their failure. You know, so it's going to be harder for us than it is for American activists. That's going to be harder for us, but we're aiming for success. We're not merely aiming to follow the trends, you know.
And I'm just going to relay one thing. I'm not going to say anything. I'm going to relay something. I know Brother Tanzeen would like this. So, you know, the question that you asked, you know, like what do you tell the Muslims and whatnot? In 2011, when the Arab Spring broke out, we went to Saudi Arabia and we posed that very same question to Sheikh Muhammad Qutb, rahimahullah. He was 96 at the time.
Brother.
Huh?
Sayyid Qutb's brother.
Yeah, Sayyid Qutb's brother, yeah. So he was 96.
That's the story, bro.
Yeah, so we went and we saw him in his son's house, and with our Sheikh Hassan Qatarji, Hafidhullah, who is one of his students, and he takes Muhammad Qutb as his mentor. So, you know, we're excited, the Arab Spring and the revolutions, and this is what we've been waiting for. So we're like, we're gonna go and we're gonna ask him, what do we do? Because he's written like 40 books on the topic. So we're like, he's gonna give us a clear trajectory. You know, he's gonna tell us like, you know, do this. He's already written about it, right? So we traveled all the way there, and we sat there, and you know, we have our notes and everything, and like, Sheikh, what do you advise us? So he said, "Usbiru wa sabiru wa rabitu." That's it. Be patient. Of course, he knew what our trajectory was. You know, the jama'ah, that the sheikh that had taken us to the brothers' house, to Muhammad Qutb's house. You know, they're very much committed to the ideas of Sayyid Qutb rahimahullah, which is that there must be a rupture and there must be no compromise with the prevailing secular order and nation state or parliamentary participation, all of that nonsense, right? So he knew that's what we were committed to. So he said, beyond that, I can only tell you to be patient, right? Be patient. SubhanAllah, and I didn't really understand it at the time. I'm like, no, you got to tell me something. Like, at least give me a reading list. And he told me, read Fi Dhilal al-Quran, which is like 6 volumes, 6,000 pages. I was like, okay. And then I let the other brothers ask their questions. But now, right now, with this debate, and I can see the beauty behind that nasiha. You know, so we just have to be patient, inshallah, and be committed to our platform and to be committed to this trajectory, inshallah.
My only thing is, while you're being patient,
being patient upon the haqq, not being patient to batil.
Very serious.
You guys are saying the same thing.
Activities.
Yeah, being patient upon the haqq, right? Not compromising. Yeah, this is
so, we want the struggle to be intelligent.
Yes,
I don't want to be part of a stupid movement. I want to be part of an intelligent movement, inshallah. So that's
Inshallah.
young people.
Inshallah.
Inshallah.
should be doing. Inshallah.
Inshallah. So, Jazakallah khair to the three of you for having this conversation. Hopefully, inshallah, people gain something from it. So with that, we're gonna end it. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Walaikum salam.